In the sterile, white-walled room of St. Mary's Hospital, the air hummed with the quiet rhythm of beeping monitors and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes. Alexander Volkov, a man whose name commanded boardrooms and headlines, sat rigid in a stiff chair beside his son's bed. His tailored suit, sharp enough to cut glass, felt out of place in the pediatric ward, where hope and despair danced an uneasy waltz. At 42, Alexander was a titan of industry, a billionaire whose tech empire spanned continents, yet here, in this small room, he was powerless. His 9-year-old son, Dmitry, lay pale and fragile, his legs motionless beneath the thin hospital blanket, the result of a car accident that had stolen his ability to walk 6 months ago. Alexander's world had fractured that day. The screech of tires, the shatter of glass, and Dmitry's scream still haunted his dreams. He had thrown every resource at his son's recovery: specialists from Zurich, experimental therapies from Tokyo, a private wing in this hospital, but the prognosis remained grim. Dmitry might never walk again. The boy, once a whirlwind of energy who raced through their Moscow estate, was now confined to a wheelchair, his laughter replaced by a quiet resignation that broke Alexander's heart more than any corporate loss ever could. He glanced at his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's homes, and sighed. Another late night. His phone buzzed with emails from his COO, urgent updates about a merger, but he ignored them. Dmitry was his priority now, the only thing that mattered. The boy stirred, his dark eyes flickering open, catching the dim light. "Papa," he whispered, his voice soft but steady, "will you read to me?" Alexander forced a smile, reaching for the worn copy of The Little Prince on the bedside table. Before he could start, the door swung open, and a nurse entered, her presence like a burst of sunlight in the gloom. Her name tag read, Elena, and she moved with a grace that seemed to defy the weight of her long shift. Her auburn hair was pulled into a messy bun, and her green eyes sparkled with a warmth that Alexander hadn't seen in months. She carried a tray of medical supplies, but her smile was for Dmitry alone. "Good evening, my favorite adventurer," Elena said, her voice lilting with a playful tone that made Dmitry's face light up. "Ready for our nightly mission?" Dmitry grinned, a rare sight these days. "Only if you do the dance first," he teased. Alexander frowned, unsure what this ritual entailed. He'd seen Elena before, of course, she was one of Dmitry's regular nurses, but he'd been too buried in his own grief to notice her beyond her competence. Now, he watched as she set the tray down, plugged her phone into a small speaker, and selected a song. A cheerful pop tune filled the room, its upbeat rhythm clashing with the hospital's somber atmosphere. Elena kicked off her sensible shoes, revealing mismatched socks, one with stars, the other with polka dots, and began to dance. It wasn't a polished performance, no choreographed routine, but it was alive with joy. She twirled, swayed, and dipped, her movements exaggerated to make Dmitry laugh. The boy clapped, his thin hands beating time against the armrests of his wheelchair. Then, to Alexander's astonishment, Elena took Dmitry's hands and gently pulled him into the dance. She moved his wheelchair in slow, careful spins, guiding him through the motions as if they were partners in a ballroom. Dmitry's laughter echoed, bright and unrestrained, a sound Alexander hadn't heard in months. For a moment, Alexander forgot the weight of his empire, the endless meetings, the sterile reports from doctors. He saw his son not as a patient, but as a child again, caught in a fleeting moment of happiness. Elena caught his eye mid-spin, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second, as if she sensed the storm behind his stoic facade. Then she winked at Dmitry and continued, undeterred. When the song ended, Dmitry was breathless with giggles, and Elena was flushed, her bun now a chaotic cascade of curls. She bowed dramatically, earning another round of applause from her one-boy audience. "Now, Captain Dmitry," she said, mock serious, "time for your vitals check." No escaping the mission. As she worked, Alexander studied her. She was young, maybe late 20s, with a face that held both kindness and resilience. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking Dmitry's chart, adjusting his IV, but her attention never wavered from the boy. She asked him about his day, his favorite parts of The Little Prince *, and whether he thought aliens preferred chocolate or vanilla ice cream. Dmitry answered with a spark Alexander hadn't seen in ages, his voice animated as he debated the merits of chocolate. "You're good with him," Alexander said abruptly, his voice low, almost reluctant. It was the first time he'd spoken to her directly. Elena glanced up, surprised but unfazed. "He's easy to be good with," she replied simply, ruffling Dmitry's hair. "He's got a fighter's heart." Alexander nodded, unsure how to respond. He wasn't used to this. People who spoke without calculation, who saw his son not as a tragedy but as a person. He stood, smoothing his suit, and excused himself to take a call. But as he stepped into the hallway, the image of Elena and Dmitri dancing lingered, a crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. Over the next few weeks, Alexander found himself at the hospital more often, not just for Dmitri but to observe Elena. She was a constant, her shifts aligning with his visits. Each time, she brought something new, a puzzle, a silly story, or another impromptu dance. Dmitri began to look forward to her visits, his mood lifting in ways no therapy had achieved. Alexander, too, felt a shift. The hospital, once a place of dread, became a strange refuge where he could glimpse a world beyond his control, one where joy could exist despite pain. One evening, after another dance session, this time to a jazzy tune that had Dmitri pretending to play the saxophone, Alexander lingered as Elena tidied up. Dmitri had fallen asleep, exhausted but smiling. The room was quiet, save for the hum of machines. Alexander cleared his throat, feeling oddly vulnerable. "Why do you do it?" he asked. "The dancing, the games. You don't have to." Elena paused, her hands stilling on the chart. "Because he deserves to feel like a kid," she said, her voice soft but firm. "This place can take that away from him. I won't let it." Her words hit Alexander like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on fixing Dmitri, on surgeries, treatments, outcomes, that he'd forgotten what his son needed most, to feel alive. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, and saw not just a nurse but someone who had, in her quiet way, begun to reshape their world. He didn't know it then, but that moment was the beginning. Elena's presence would challenge everything Alexander thought he understood about strength, wealth, and love. She wasn't just saving Dmitri, she was saving him, too. The hospital room faded from Alexander's life like a dream he couldn't quite hold on to. 6 months after that first dance, Dmitri was discharged, his condition stabilized but his legs still unresponsive. Alexander had bought a sprawling estate outside Moscow, retrofitted for Dmitri's wheelchair, with ramps and wide hallways. But the real change wasn't in the architecture, it was in the laughter that now filled the house. Elena had become a fixture, not as a nurse but as family. She'd left her hospital job at Alexander's insistence, moving into a role as Dmitri's companion, though she refused to call it that. "I'm his adventure buddy," she'd say, grinning. One spring evening, as cherry blossoms drifted across the estate's garden, Alexander watched Elena push Dmitri's wheelchair through a makeshift obstacle course she'd built from cushions and hula hoops. Dmitri's laughter rang out, and Alexander felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. Later, over coffee in the quiet kitchen, he asked Elena to marry him. She laughed, thinking he was joking, but his eyes, steady, unguarded, told her he meant it. She said yes, and their lives, once fractured, began to weave together into something whole. Dmitri never walked again, but with Elena's help, he soared in other ways, racing adaptive bikes, painting vibrant canvases, and dreaming bigger than his father ever had. Alexander, too, changed. He scaled back his empire, delegating more, and found joy in moments he'd once overlooked, reading to Dmitri, dancing with Elena under the stars. The millionaire who once measured life in profits now measured it in love, and it was more than enough.